Some people would say that the Negro is part of a permanent underclass. I say he's part of a dependent class. What is a dependent class? A dependent class is an economic social class based of people who rely on getting their needs met by people in other communities. And this is what the Negro has become. He has become a part of a underclass that is completely dependent on getting their needs met by others. If you look at the condition of this Afro-American Negro over the last 40 years, he has become completely dependent on getting his needs met by white liberal social programs and, in some cases, some perfunctory jobs. That is pretty much how the Negro gets his needs met. But it wasn't the case all the time. If you look at the Negro economy before the white liberal came in with his social programs, Negro pretty much was capable of doing things on his own. He had his own economy, he had his own businesses, and in some cases, a few pieces of infrastructure. But this all changed after integration was brought into the Negro community. When you look at integration, it had a devastating effect on the Afro-American Negro community because instead of the Negro taking care of his own economic needs and providing for his own community, he began looking outside to get his needs met by non-black businesses and non-black infrastructure. And this was um, made a Ralph Ellison made a statement about this in his classic novel Invisible Man, and how the Negro coveted did serge suits from Barney's and getting things from all of these high-end white stores where no one really valued his dollar. And the liberals saw how much the Negro coveted these items, like those serge suits from Barney's, and being a part of white society, and decided to capitalize on it. And when he decided to capitalize on it, it undermined the African American economy. This is why the liberal came in with the idea of integration, because he saw the economic opportunities that he would have um, and the ways he could profit off of this Afro American Negro. So he came to the Negro with this concept of integration and this concept of tolerance, and businesses, seeing how much money they could make off this Negro, decided, we'll let this Negro come in. We really don't like this Negro. We really don't respect this Negro. But we're going to let him come into our stores, let him buy our clothes, let him shop freely, and we're going to take his dollars. And with that, because the Negro has a bad case of cognitive distortion and believes that the white man's ice is colder than his, even though the temperature of ice is absolute zero, he went over to these white businesses, abandoned his own businesses, abandoned his own infrastructure, and allowed it to completely deteriorate and in some neighborhoods completely collapse. This, along with the riots of the 1960s after the deaths of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, pretty much left the Negro community in a really poor economic state. But it wasn't really too bad. It was somewhat it was pretty much damaged. But what really finished off the Negro economy was the establishment of the welfare state, and this happened in three stages actually. The first stage was the 1968 escalation in Vietnam, where a disproportionate number of African American men were drafted into to fight this Vietnam War. The second stage was black women supported going along with white women in the feminist movement. And the third stage was the liberal creating all these social programs as part of the war of the so-called war on poverty. And in this war on poverty, what happened was the Negro was offered a whole bunch of offered acceptance to a whole bunch of social programs, such as welfare, and later on, food stamps was established, WIC was established, Section 8 housing, public housing, and all these programs, the black woman took because she felt that her man was not able to provide for her. When in actuality, her man could have been able to provide for her had he been given a stable job or his business infrastructure had not been completely destroyed in those riots by dysfunctional Negroes. He would have had the infrastructure and the economic means if he had one, not fallen for the integration game, two, not destroyed his own businesses and his own community in those riots, and three, not falling for the okie doke regarding these social programs. But what the liberal wanted to create was a class of people who were completely dependent, you know, on social programs. And what happened was Negro female, thinking that she could be just like this white woman, and she wanted a more stable source of income, fell for the bait. And she decided, I want to be able to be like this white woman. I want to be able to have the economic stability of this white woman. And so she took the economic bait and fell for it. And that's that was all part of the long-term plan. See, the liberal had a long-term plan, you know, overall to keep people dependent on him so he could continue to make money off the Negro on the front end and the back end. And this is something that the liberal wanted to do. And he pretty much did it. And what he did through it was create, with this first generation of women, was lay the foundation for his permanent underclass, or as I call it, the dependent class. And the whole thing is that the liberal understood, the bigger picture. And the big picture is, again, keeping people dependent. And he understood in order to do that, you need to get to the woman first. You can't do that with the man, because if you aim your social programs at the man and actually making things equal, he's going to use his skills towards building. What he's gonna do is he may stay on a social program for to get ahead up, but eventually he's going to take those skills and start creating businesses. And the liberal didn't want the Negro to create businesses. This is why he targeted all his social programs towards the female, because he understands that the female is the teacher of culture to her children, and because she teaches the culture and teaches the values to her children, you know, what happens is they learn from her how to be dependent, and then she passes that on to her daughters, and her sons, and they learn how to become dependent on social programs. And this is what the part of establishing a dependent class is: social engineering. One generation teaches the next generation. And the liberal really wanted to get to that second generation, which was the Generation X and the Generation Y, and have those values passed on from one generation to the next. And when you had that established, with that first generation who embraced the feminist movement, they taught their children to, go to the welfare, go to the Section 8, go to the social programs, go look for these college tuition programs, go to a government program, and never to do for yourself. And with each generation that gets taught this dependent class way of thinking, it leads to the foundation being established for this, what I call the dependent class. But what's the most dangerous thing about creating a dependent class is you have the situation that you have right now, which is we're on the third generation of dependent class individuals. See, this first generation of dependent class people, they became the teen single mothers, and then they went out and bred the next generation of single mothers. See, the first generation of the feminist movement was single mothers. Second generation became the teen single mothers. And then later on, we had another generation of single mothers. In this Negro community, people don't see how this class was established. Now all these classes are all dependent on this white liberal social programs or on some sort of job. They are not like their grandfathers and great-grandfathers who went out and were building their own businesses and building their own infrastructure. It wasn't the greatest infrastructure and weren't the greatest businesses, but you had a sense. The whole thing is that the mindset was completely different. And the mindset was completely about doing for yourself, having your own, doing for your own, and taking care of your own. And that's what was the thing that the liberal wanted to erase from the Negro's mind through this social engineering component of his social programs. Was he wanted the Negro to start thinking only about having dependency on someone else and getting your needs met by someone else. And what we have today is a complete underclass of dependent class Negroes. And most of these dependent class Negroes, all they think about is getting their needs met by someone else instead of trying to put themselves first and meet their needs on their own. This is what we have right now. Dependent class people, every time you talk to them, there's always, there are two ideas that come out of their mind: social program or working on somebody's job. And these are the two things that these dependent class Negroes think of. And a dependent class Negro will sit there and tell you that if it's not a social program or a job, these are the only two solutions that they have. They never think about, long term starting their own business or being an entrepreneur. They're either thinking about working for someone else or being a consumer. They never think on a producer level. They never think in a producer mindset because, again, this has been bred out of the Negro. This has been, mentally conditioned out of the Negro because the culture that he has been taught teaches him to be completely dependent. And a dependent class person, is completely dysfunctional because an adult is not supposed to be dependent on another adult. I mean, in the way the liberal has people. Because the liberal's relationship that he's established with the Negro is completely codependent. And in a codependent relationship, one person has more power over another person, and that person pretty much dictates all the terms to that person and how they live. And this is really dysfunctional because the whole thing is an adult who is codependent never wants to do things on their own. And they always think of being in this victim abuser relationship. And they spend half their time either being the victim of this person who was the abuser or looking for crumbs from this abuser. The abuser will attack them. They will go and come in with their shaming language. Then the abuser will offer them crumbs to pacify them. And then, the cycle starts all over again. But what it has done, this dependent class, has driven the entire American economy into a tailspin. It's a long-term tailspin over the last 40 years because instead of us getting innovation and creativity and really competition, we have gotten a real group of just completely dysfunctional, codependent people who live to be the victim, who have no real ideas, who have no innovation, and who live, to be completely dependent on each other. And they live to play this finger pointing game where one person says they're the victim of the other, and nothing is really growing when you really look at America overall. The establishment of the dependent class has left this country pretty much in a real stagnant state because when you have dependent people are always looking to get their needs met by somebody else. They're not looking to go out and do for themselves. They're not looking to go out on their own. They're not looking to explore new ideas. They're not looking to challenge themselves. They always live to be the victim. These are people who have no passion, no heart. They give up all the time. They give up whenever they run into a challenge. And what I'm seeing now in this new generation of children is that the situation has actually gotten worse. I mean, I hear stories from my family members who work in education, and they tell me about how kids have just given up. They have no resolve. They have no character. They have no perseverance. And this is black, white, regardless of any color or race. Um, this dependent way of thinking is permeating all parts of American culture, and this victimized way of thinking is permeating all parts of American culture. And people believe that they are victims, and they are not making any efforts to persevere or to try to overcome obstacles or even try to solve problems. They have no grit. They have no character. What it is that they're so used to people, trying to pacify them and trying to meet their needs that they never think of, trying to make efforts to stand on their own 2 feet or try to make efforts to persevere. And this is all based on the liberal's plan to create his dependent class. But in actuality, he has created a codependent class of people, and on either side, both black and white, nothing is getting done. What we're having now is generation after generation of victims, and no one is learning, how to build a character or resolve. Everybody, something offends them, they never think, um, you know, just shake that off and move on like people of previous generations did. What they think is, I want some type of compensation. I want some type of, you know, some type of reward, or they had come in with these severe self entitlement issues where they feel that everybody owes them something, and this is all part of this dependent class way of thinking. This dependent class, I'm seeing the long term effects of it, and it's devastating. The long term effects of a dependent class is we get people who who, if you can even get them to a job, feel entitled to the job, and they feel that they deserve certain things, or and you go to them in school, they also think that they're entitled to certain things, And no one thinks that they have to work for anything. Nobody thinks that they have to run into obstacles and that they have to deal with any sort of problem. They don't think about anything. When you look at the Negro community, you can see the roots of the dependent class. And I now see the roots of this dependent class spreading and this dependent way of thinking and this entitled way of thinking. And I see it choking the life out of this country. And when you look at this dependent class, people thought the liberal thought creating a dependent class would mean he would get a steady stream of money towards himself. But what we're seeing 40 years later is that this dependent class is pretty much choking the life out of the country. Because when you have dependent people, they never grow, they never change, they never, take those steps to move forward. And this is all due to the way dependent people think. Dependent people, again, they always think about getting their needs met by somebody else. And because the liberal created the cycle of people who make a bunch out of noise and then you throw crumbs at them, we now have people who think this is how you get your needs met. They don't think about, going out to go and get their own. They never think about persevering. They never think about, overcoming whatever obstacles are in front of them. They never see what social programs were supposed to be. They see them as a sense of something that they can depend on or something they can fall back on as some sort of cushion. They don't think about, if I don't have this program, what am I going to do? And what you have with dependent people is you have to wind up taking care of them for the rest of your life, and that's just not a healthy way to live. When you live relying on somebody else's needs to meet your needs. Now, God is the ultimate provider of meeting your needs. He will facilitate for you, but that's not like being completely dependent. A dependent person is a complete wreck, and that's what we have today, especially in the Negro community. We have people who just they don't want to go out and build businesses. They just want to go work for somebody else. They want to be taken care of by somebody else. And they don't want to be the leader in their own lives. They just want to follow. And this is one of the big problems when you create a dependent class. Dependent people live to follow. They live to go behind somebody else. And they never think about going out on their own, creating their own. And if you do create something on your own, they learn not to value it because, again, they still believe that that white man's ice is always colder or that corporate product is better than something made by their own people, when in actuality the products made by your own people should have more value than those made by an outsider. This is why a Negro can go to a foreign-owned store and spend $200 there and scoff at a product made by his own people that costs $10 or $15. This is just the way he thinks because, again, this has been socially engineered into his mind, socially engineered into his way of thinking, and because he has learned dependency as a way of thinking, he never grows, and his community never expands, and his community never thinks of building anything because the whole entrepreneurial mindset and the whole sense of self-determination, self-worth, and perseverance, it's all been bred out of this Negro. It's just been completely bred out by all these liberal policies, the feminist movement, and the culture taught to him by his black mother, his black single mother, many, many years ago. It was bred out of the first generation and mentally conditioned, continually be mentally conditioned with each passing generation. And this is what has created what some people call the permanent underclass, but I call it dependent class. But the whole thing is that the dependent class is completely starting to backfire because you cannot sustain dependency. People being dependent on you, it starts to become a bit of a headache as you get older. When you have people dependent on you, early on, like in the 70s and the early 80s, yeah, the machine runs freely. But with the economy, starting to stagnate due to America not being as innovative as it was 40 years ago or creative as 40 years ago, and we have less industries, less infrastructure, less jobs. You can't really sustain all these people and have them completely be dependent on you. Eventually, the costs of social programs starts to encroach on your business model, and right now, even the cost of these prisons is eventually going to start encroaching on your business model because all these things cost money to operate, and they don't really net you a profit. So having this Negro remain dependent, you know, keeps your economy from growing. So the attempts to keep the Negro in a dependent class is actually, bringing the country further into a downward spiral. And this downward spiral is choking the life out of the country. It's preventing it from growing as in proportion to other countries like your India and your China and even the European Union. It's not allowing the U.S. to be competitive. Now, if they were to allow the Negro to remain to compete and keep his businesses and infrastructure, I think we would have seen a completely different United States right now. I would think we would see a more aggressive United States, a more competitive United States, because this dependent class right now is like a big anchor. It's choking the life out of not only the Negro, but now it's starting to choke the life out of other white Americans, and other non-black Americans. I mean, they're growing, like the Hispanic community is growing and the Asian community is growing. Um, but I look at the overall picture of America, and the economy is really being held back by this continuing dependent class. The whole idea of dependent people is that, again, they don't have any idea. Their mindset is based on consumption. It's not based on production. It's based on dependency. And dependent people, they're looking for somebody else to meet their needs, and they're not thinking of meeting their own. They have no sense of entrepreneurship. They have no sense of leadership. They have no idea what these concepts were. I mean, even the slaves, when they were free, had an idea of what they wanted to do. They had an idea of entrepreneurship. They had an idea of leadership. They had perseverance. They have resolve. They had character. And they went out, even you know, after the Civil War, and went out and built communities and built businesses. And even some of them had political office. And we look at today's Negro, because he's completely dependent, he is too afraid to actually go out and venture into doing these things. The slaves had nothing, in many cases, when they first started out, except the skills that they learned on the plantations, and they were able to do this. But today's Negro, because he has been bred out of him, and he's become this, completely codependent individual, he doesn't have that type of courage or that type of resolve to do these type of things. And this is what has been bred out of him by this liberal and his liberal policies. And if you look at these liberal policies, they have created a dependent underclass that, if you look at it, is not benefiting anyone these days. And the whole concept of having people dependent on you is really a screwed up idea. Why should one man depend on another man? Every man has to learn how to carry himself and be accountable for himself. This is something that should be taught to every man as a value. But in Negro communities, everybody is either taught to head to a social program or head to a job, but they're never taught, you know, to go out and try to do for themselves. Now, I have no issue with jobs. A job is good for you if that's what you want to do, but eventually, you know, what you should be trying to do with a job is get to the point where you learn enough skills to get your own business. And this is something that is not taught to Negro people these days. They're not taught, go get your own business, go get your own infrastructure, you know, take the skills that you've learned at a job and try to expand on it. I mean, just don't sit there and go work for somebody for 20 years and then when you get laid off, you're sitting there going, they laid me off, I ain't got no job. No, the whole point of you getting a job is to get enough experience or to get enough skills that you hone a craft that you can actually go out and build your own business for yourself so that you can control the money that you make and you can control a part of your economy and part of your community. And that's part of the big picture. But again, because people learned this dependent class back in the 60s, this has been socially engineered out of people. And we really need more entrepreneurs. Really need more business people. We really need more, people who are creating in the black community innovative ideas and innovative concepts towards building that new black community. But again, it's hard to do that when you have a socially engineered dependent class that only knows a continuing dependence on social programs, entry-level jobs, and, you know, stuff that allows other people to make money off the Negro, but never the Negro learning how to make money off himself. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.